Hello, class. My name is Corey Green, and welcome to my presentation on Operation Condor and the School of the Americas. Please feel free to pause the presentation to take any notes. Now, Operation Condor has such an in depth history. There are so many different spider webs of information and resources to learn about this. So, this is a who, what, when, where, and why summarization of the events that took place. There were a lot of tensions and intense tensions rising between the Soviet Union and the United States, especially in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. The US and South America at large uh, believed that Latin America had the potential to become some sort of a base or a headquarters for more communist ideals. Revolutions and military coups were a continuing saga in Latin America. Military dictatorships in Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Bolivia, Uruguay, Brazil, Ecuador, and Peru, also known as the Southern Cone of South America, began a cooperation in November of 1975, which lasted until the mid 80s. As you can see on the graphic to the right, uh, the founding countries of Condor are in purple, and then later in 76, Brazil joined, and then in 78, Ecuador and Peru followed. Now, the U.S. was also secretly involved in this cooperation, in which they supported and funded certain missions in Operation Condor. So, what happened during Operation Condor? What was its purpose? The operation intended to eliminate leftists and opponents across the continent in order to quote unquote liquidate top level terrorist leaders. It aimed to persecute political, social, trade union, and student activists in the Southern Cone. The leaders of Operation Condor wanted to overthrow opposing civilian led regimes who had taken control of their dictatorship led regions. However, this campaign was secretly a human rights crime wave. So, that definitely, the paragraph that I just exclaimed, that's definitely one of the starting points of Operation Condor. In short, 8 Latin American countries led by right wing dictators feared being overthrown by communist insurgencies. They had a pact with America and the CIA, and they created a human rights crime wave. Fidel Castro was a communist or some sort of a communist, and he was one of the reasons why these 8 Latin American countries started this military coup. Militant militant groups rounded up countless thousands of people who were suspected of affiliation with leftist movement. Concentration camps and detention centers increasingly arisen throughout the Southern Cone. The word disappearance was added to the vocabulary of international human rights law. It referred to the process of secret arrest, torture, and interrogation of suspects, followed by execution and secret disposal of bodies. Here's a chart exclaiming the numbers in which people were either killed or disappeared in regard to victims. And you can see Uruguay had a large amount here. Here is a short video clip that exclaims the basis of Operation Condor, and it'll give you guys a better understanding.
In July 2021, following years of ongoing prosecutions, an Italian court sentenced 14 men for their role in a program known as Operation Condor, an expansive US-backed campaign of surveillance, detention, torture, and assassination carried out by right-wing Latin American regimes in the 1970s. This is how it happened. Operation Condor was born in the 1970s. The Cuban Revolution coincided with a number of independence and anti-colonial movements across the global south. In Latin America, this energy was met with a series of right-wing military coups across the continent for over a decade. In 1964 in Brazil, in 1971 in Bolivia, in Chile and Uruguay in 1973, and in Argentina in 1976. The new regimes were ruthless, subjecting their opposition to measures like targeted arrests, imprisonment, torture, kidnappings, rape, and murder. Trade unions, students, artists, and anyone suspected of being left-leaning or with Marxist sympathies were targeted. Because the coups forced many to flee, regimes were interested in tightening the security net between their countries to track dissidents. In 1975, Colonel Manuel Contreras, chief of the Chilean secret police, organized the first inter-American meeting on national intelligence. This was a covert meeting where security delegates from Chile, Bolivia, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay signed up for a new intelligence sharing arrangement designed to track subversives and persons of interest. Brazil joined in 1976, followed by Ecuador and Peru 2 years later. In addition to sharing information, the accords also allowed for agents of one country to operate easily in another. This meant that people could be tracked and captured easily even after fleeing their country, and could be subjected to torture and violence without any sense of protection or asylum. While Operation Condor was not a U.S. program, declassified documents show it undeniably had the backing of the U.S. The U.S. was equally paranoid about Latin America becoming a base for left-wing uprisings, and the brutality of Operation Condor was a convenient and effective method of containment. The Condor program existed during both the Nixon-Ford and Carter administrations. The Nixon-Ford administration directly financed and armed many of the dictatorships involved. The U.S. also directly trained many officials who went on to create the Condor system at the U.S. Army School of the Americas training camp in Panama, where they were taught counterinsurgency tactics. The U.S. also provided communication support, which was crucial to the operation of the Condor program. There is no question that the U.S. had full knowledge of the scope and brutality of what was taking place. Operation Condor began to collapse in the late 70s after the assassination of Orlando Letelier, a Chilean diplomat close to Salvador Allende. U.S. President Jimmy Carter pressured the Chilean regime to curb its repressive tactics, while Chile and Argentina began fighting over control of the Beagle Channel in 1977. The conflict, which nearly led to war, also began to create fractures between other dictatorships. But the end of the Condor program did not spell an end to political repression and violence in the region. The different regimes' agents and police continued to cooperate to kidnap, murder, and torture people for years to come. The Condor program resulted in an estimated 50,000 killed, 30,000 disappeared, and up to 400,000 arrested and imprisoned. Few of those responsible for ordering and carrying out Condor's campaign of terror and brutality have been brought to justice. Many continued to hold high-ranking government and military positions even after regimes ended, while others went into exile abroad to avoid prosecution. Many victims and their remains are still missing. There has also been no real reckoning for those who were involved in backing and financing regimes from abroad. Over the years, some prosecutions have taken place, but they have been few and far between. Perhaps the highest profile arrest was that of former Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, who was arrested in London and brought back to Chile. But years of legal wrangling meant that he died still having escaped conviction for any of his crimes. The historic life sentences handed down by an Italian court in 2021 will bring some comfort, but for many, justice for their disappeared friends and loved ones may never come.
Okay, so that presentation should definitely have provided a more in-depth understanding of Operation Condor. Now, in the video, it mentioned the School of the Americas. This school was originally established in 1946 in the Panama Canal Zone as the Latin American Center of Ground Division. In 63, the school acquired its own name and Spanish became its official language. However, in 84, the school suspended operations in compliance with the Panama Canal Treaty. And then in December, the school reopened at Fort Benning, Georgia, as part of the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. Now, supporters of the School of the Americas claim that its students were vital for U.S. national security interests. However, many of its students were known to commit international atrocities like Operation Condor, as well as violate human rights laws. This was not conspiracy, being that some of the graduates became real-life dictators, such as the one pictured to the right. He was a student of the School of the Americas, and he was also heavily involved in the atrocities of Operation Condor. Here's a short clip that'll give you guys a more in-depth understanding of the School of the Americas.
Here are the facts. Fort Benning is located in Columbus, Georgia, From 1984 to 2001, the fort was home to one of the government's most controversial facilities, the School of the Americas. This school was founded in Panama in 1946 with the purpose of training Latin American soldiers to combat leftist or non-democratic threats. In 1948, the school relocated to Fort Benning. For decades, this school trained Latin American soldiers to combat these leftist threats feared during the Cold War. The school was dogged by growing controversy, and in 2000, the government closed the School of the Americas completely. The Department of Defense took over the program and renamed the facility the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, or WINSEC. According to their website, WINSEC provides professional education and training to eligible military, law enforcement, and civilian personnel of nations in the Western Hemisphere. But what are they teaching? Here's where it gets crazy. According to opposition groups such as the School of the Americas Watch, WINSEC and the original School of the Americas are essentially the same organization, and they're teaching their students how to commit crimes, including torturous interrogation methods, guerrilla warfare, and brutal counterinsurgency techniques. Is this true? In 1996, the U.S. government released 7 Spanish-language manuals used at the school and throughout Latin America. These manuals, which were used between 1982 and 1991, shocked the public. They appeared to condone beatings, torture, and even execution. The Pentagon conducted an investigation and met with Congress in closed briefings. Ultimately, about 24 passages in the manuals were found to contradict official U.S. policy, although the Pentagon claimed some quotations were taken out of context. It was the scandal over these instruction manuals that ultimately led to the closing of the original school. Yet these manuals are only part of the criticism. The School of the Americas Watch argues that graduates have used their education to commit atrocities and to violate human rights laws. This is far from a conspiratorial claim. Graduates of the school include such prominent dictators as Manuel Noriega and the Argentinian dictator Roberto Viola. In a 2001 article for The Guardian, journalist George Monbiot listed more than 10 graduates linked with atrocities. The Secretary of Defense states that the individuals cited for human rights violations are only a small portion of the school's graduates. Supporters of the school argue that it is vital for U.S. national security interest, and that holding the school responsible for the actions of its graduates is like holding a university responsible when its former students commit crimes. However, there's a potential flaw in this logic. What if, as the school's opponents claim, the school is teaching Latin American soldiers, police, and civilians techniques that are inherently criminal? WINSEC remains open today. Despite criticism, the Department of Defense maintains that the school is vital to U.S. security interest and has no plans to close the facility. The original Spanish-language manuals condoning crimes have been revised. Opponents believe that WINSEC is little more than an attempt to whitewash what George Monbiot describes as a terrorist training camp.
I'm going to stop the video right there, but that should definitely give you all an in-depth understanding of the School of the Americas. Other than that, I want to go ahead and give you these points to remember for the exam. So feel free to pause this slide. But most importantly, remember for life. Militant dictatorships in South America's southern cone committed atrocious crimes, in order to maintain and demand political supremacy and diminish civilian freedoms. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.